Looking at, for today's classes, we're continuing our study in boundaries, of course. We're going to be in there. If you look over there, I've got eight topics, and we're still on the first one, so eventually we're going to get there. But what I did do is I did change the verse as kind of a go-to verse. If you look over there on the board, Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And so the general concept of that is we got to protect ourselves. Sometimes we got to watch out for ourselves. We got to maintain ourselves, for lack of a better way to say it. So we talked a lot about consequences last week. We talked about our consequences necessary is kind of where we ended out last week's class. And so some weren't here last week. If you have some thoughts on that, we talked about a lot of different things, different processes as it comes to our consequences necessary. We had a really good conversation about that. This weird looking chart thing is actually supposed to be a barbed wire fence. Right? Because we're talking about what consequences are, right? Shut up, don't make fun of it, I'm not an artist, right? And so you have the fence. Yeah, I don't know what all this is on top. But when you look at it, when we talked about fencing last week, right? What do you put on the top of the fence? Barbed wire. Why do we put barbed wire on the top of the fence? As a consequence for trying to scale that, right? And so the question comes back, how many of you tore pants on a pair of barbed wire fence back when you were young? If you didn't, you did not live, right? Because trying to climb the farmer's fence or your own fences or whatever it is, you would catch yourself on this barbed wire. That was a consequence of trying to climb the fence, right? And so I'm working on this right now, trying to figure out a way to keep my dogs, because we got this new puppy, is ridiculous, and I'm trying to figure out a way to keep it in the yard. So I got to figure out some kind of consequence for it trying to escape. And we got these other two dogs that have decided to roam across 64. There's a good choice.
Okay, so
right?
they do this rope and they put PVC pipe and then they roll back over on the other side. I've seen that on Facebook.
Okay, and so is that a consequence? The roll back? I hope they hit their head. Anyway, so right, because boundaries are like property lines, right? Those are the things that define us between the other people. And so we ask, are these consequences necessary in life? And so what we talked about last week is, what's the point of having a boundary if there are no what? If there are no consequences for doing the things that you set a boundary for, either a consequence for yourself or a consequence for somebody else, right? And so we set a consequence for others. And here's what he has to say. Where is that part? I wanted to read that. Give me just a second. I highlighted. Where'd it go? Okay, it says right here, he says, trespassing on other people's property carries consequences. No trespassing signs usually carry a threat of prosecution if someone steps over the boundaries. The Bible teaches this principle over and over, saying that if we walk one way, this will happen. If we walk another way, something else will happen. Jesus said that just as the Bible sets consequences for certain behaviors, we need to back up our boundaries with consequences. It goes on to say, how many marriages could have been saved if one spouse had followed through with the threat of, if you don't stop drinking or coming home at midnight or hitting me or yelling at the kids, I will leave until you get some treatment? Or how many adults' lives would have been turned around if their parents had followed through with their threat of no more money if you quit another job without having future employment? And so we look at the concept of consequences are necessary to enforce the consequences. What did I say? Consequences are necessary to enforce the boundaries. Okay. So, any other thoughts are on are consequences necessary? And then we have this little notation down here of equal application. We talked about that a little bit towards the end of class last week. That says sometimes we don't apply them equally. And we were talking about work situations especially. There are situations where parents don't apply them equally to who? The kids. All right, how many parents had a favorite son or daughter, and it wasn't you? Who's the favorite?
Caitlin.
Who's favorite? Now you got it. Who's the favorite with? That's with mom, right? I don't like none of you equally, right? And so Sam is because Sam comes and mows my yard on his own, and I don't have to do nothing to make him do it. He just comes over and mows it because he likes our lawnmower, right? And so he works on my cars because he likes to do that. I like Sam. Sam helps me. Where is Sam?
I don't know.
Because he's here somewhere.
Are you sure?
Yeah, he came here. So, what's the danger of not setting equal consequences? Resentment. Who said resentment? What else?
They do the that's not fair. And
That's not fair. Absolutely. Okay. How many of you's daddy told you life ain't fair? Right? That's what my dad used to tell me, and then he would tell me why it's not fair. Have I told you that? Son, life's not fair. I don't know that you've ever said that to me, though. I think you've learned it. Okay. It creates resentment. I think it does. I think that might be one of the bigger problems with not equal application of consequences, because the person who gets it a little bit harder, maybe, they get resentful. And then what does that person who gets resentful tend to do? They set their own set of boundaries, don't they? Against the person that they feel unequally presented or applied those boundaries. Anybody know anybody struggled with that? That's hard. That's hard, right? We also said that consequences on boundaries are really good. They're good for the person, and they're also good for you, right? If you set a boundary with yourself of what you will or will not do to somebody else, that tends to be good for you. I think we ended out class last week saying, listen, you do nobody a favor by not enforcing your boundaries, do you? Do you? In fact, you can cause more damage, right? If you have children and you aren't consistent, I think as parents, consistency is our single biggest problem of application of consequences of the boundaries that we set for them. Right? One of the things I deal with parents all the time in my counseling practice is they're just not consistent. Today it's okay to do this, but tomorrow, does anybody grow up in that home? Where it depended on the mood of the parent as to whether it mattered? Right? Does that make sense? Anybody ever heard that? Nobody wants to raise their hand to that one, do they?
Or one parent, like with us, one parent will say yes and one parent will say no.
And then you as a kid learn how to do what?
And then do you go to the yes parent?
Yeah.
Wait till the parents are separated and then kids do it.
Yeah. I tend to say, did you ask your mother when they come to me? Because they don't come to me and ask questions unless mom said no. And so I got to the habit, because if I then said yes, I already told them no. And I'm like, whoa! So I got to the point where I told them, what'd your mother say? And they'd be like, right? And then they get in trouble for what? Trying to manipulate. Because that creates a wedge between who? The parents. Right? So there's a consequence for creating a wedge. Okay? There really is. There is a consequence for that. Right? So, any questions on that? Any thoughts on that? Anything that we didn't talk about as it comes to that?
I will say that this drives me crazy. It's not, parents, they probably do it too, and that would drive me crazy. But so I'm at school, so I hear teachers, and they'll be like, well, I've already told him 3 times not to do this. And I'm like, why are you telling him 3 times? He's in high school. He knows not to do it automatically. When he does it, it's a consequence. Like, give him a QR code. So it drives me crazy when people are like, they keep being nice, and they give chance after chance after chance, and all they're doing is driving themselves crazy, and the kids are learning, that they don't really have to follow rules.
You work for City?
I do.
Which school do you work for?
City.
City.
Sorry, high school.
High school. Cute.
Well, I said these are high school students.
All right.
That'd have been anything for it.
QR codes?
Yeah.
How effective are they?
Well, when they're applied, they're very effective.
What's the problem?
That they get too many warnings before because the QR code's you break a rule, get a QR code. So when we do that for those students that it happens to, then it's very effective.
We don't understand that. What
QR
is QR code?
It's just we have a QR code thing. That's what we call it, QR code. So I just scan it, put the kid's name in, their offense, and it goes into a form. And so I don't really know what
automatic
you can
discipline.
break, you can. So it depends on how many you have, and it's an escalation. So
it's a tracking system.
Get 10, then you get ISS. But
how many last 9 weeks? Who had the most? Not the kid, but how many were there? How many did the kid who had the most have? See, I talked to a lot of people out of your school,
probably 15. It seems like the number that kid had. I can pull it up.
Pull it up. Now, here's the argument. There's a set consequence for a certain number of QR codes. Here's what I've heard coming out of the students of that program. That they, number one, it's not applied equally. Certain teachers apply more than others, and administration's not holding the kids accountable, so what do they matter?
Yeah,
I've
so
talked to
that's-
several
you have-
students
That's what
that-
I'm saying. You have
and-
teachers,
yes.
some teachers keep giving grace and grace and grace, and you're like, stop. Do it. Do
Yeah,
it.
but you know what the problem with the teachers? Because I talked to some of the teachers, you know what they say? Administration's not enforcing them anyway. So the consequences are either not equally enforced or not enforced at all. So what happens to the program?
It falls apart.
It falls apart. Right? It has to be enforced.
Consequences are not visible as
Mm-hmm.
it looks fine, but usually when you carry somebody in the hall and got into the office
Mm-hmm.
and you could hear the spanking all the way down to the hall by somebody's dad. It kind of has.
Mr. Dawson, my elementary school, you could hear him down the hall
That's-
smacking some kid with a paddle. Right?
We had them hanging down in
Yes.
various parts so
Now,
the principal could get a hold of them.
I love the QR code program. I think it's a great idea. I think the concept of it, the context or the concept of it is wonderful. It is not effectively enforced. I would argue any school you go to, you're going to run into that. It's not, the systems are not equally or appropriately enforced the way they say they were, because arguably your entire school is going to be expelled if you run it the way you're supposed to. And so, what else? Thank you, Julie. That was a great one. What else? Anything else?
Well, in that situation, you've got teenage kids that are going to be soon adults
Yeah.
that don't respect the boundaries
Mm-hmm.
or the rules. They're going to be adults not
Right, you're better
respecting.
off to not have rules than to have rules and don't enforce them. Because that teaches a bad lesson, right?
What did the John Wick movie say?
Consequences.
No, rules. If there aren't rules, we're just like the animals. If there aren't rules or if there aren't expectations,
In society.
if there aren't consequences. But you know, rules are great. Rules are pointless if you don't what? Right? Say again?
Be consistent.
Be consistent.
You know, there was a time that, a long time ago, when the church used to disfellowship people.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they wrote the letter.
Anybody remember the good old days?
To different congregations that said, look, we kicked them out, basically. They tried and tried and tried.
Mhm.
And that was their consequence. It wasn't just to make a point. It was to protect the congregation as well, but also to just wake the person up. You are getting this fellowship for a reason. You are living a sinful life that you have no regrets of doing.
Mhm.
You have to suffer those consequences when you are trying to bond with us as those who are trying to live right.
Why does this fellowship not work today?
Get sued over it.
You can get sued over it. Sherry, your parents' church one time got sued over that, didn't it? No. Who was it? Somebody we know. Somebody we know. You remember who it was? Anyway.
It was a
Badge
church
of
up
honor
north.
these days.
Yeah.
It was a church up north that got sued because
Somebody
along with
down here
the
got
letter,
sued.
This fellowship pretty much explains what they did,
Mhm.
and so that was considered a private. You know, that's my business, and that's a private thing. Nobody's business to be shared among the public.
Mm-hmm.
And one COC got sued, and the person won.
Mm-hmm.
Won the lawsuit.
There's another reason that it doesn't work today. We're thinking too deep.
Well, some church, like, if they put it out there, they're just they can just go somewhere else, and some are like,
Ah.
it doesn't apply. that
How
doesn't apply
many-
to us, that's
Church of Christ's are there in Lincoln County? One, two, three. Church of Christ.
Are you talking about in the rural area too?
Lincoln County as a box.
30.
It's how messy.
20, at least 20, if not more, just churches of Christ. Does not count the Presbyterian Church, does not count the Catholic Church, does not count the Methodist Church, does not count the Methodist Church, the weird little stone church over here in the corner, right? The Rock. It doesn't count all of these just in between churches or whatever they are. How many are there? How many different places is there for somebody to go? You know why disfellowship doesn't work anymore? Because number one, we're not a united body. And number two, they just go somewhere else. In the first century, there was one church where?
In each city.
In each city. So if you got tossed from that church, you had to move towns if you wanted to go to another church. That's why disfellowship does not work today. Because there are too many divisions and... Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
If we were one church, the way we're supposed to be one church, disfellowship would work.
People don't realize we're in COCs in Lincoln County. We are far from being unified. And I grew up in this county, so you got COCs that are diehard conservative.
Mhm.
You got those that are on the liberal side. You got those that are on the middle of the road side, and that's how they see each other.
Mhm.
So they segment it away from other COCs just within this county and this town.
It could arguably said, I'm going to pick on Church of Christ for a minute. Sorry, it'll be. Did you know the other denominational groups get along better than we get along with ourselves? We just do. They just do. You have the Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, the Anglican Church, the Pentecostal Church, the Cumberland Presbyterian Church on the hill, which is as close to us as you can get. They have group meetings. Now, I'm not saying we should be meeting, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying they are able to get along better. Then we can't get along with West Fayetteville Church of Christ on the hill. Or maybe they can't get along with us. Pick one. I don't care which one it is. We can't get along with each other. Then we have little country churches that don't want to engage with anybody else because they don't want to lose their church. This is the Mimosa Church of Christ, or this is Huntland Church of Christ, or this. Well, they're in Franklin County, but you understand the concept. They don't want to engage with anybody else because they are their own entity. We are unable to enforce consequences within the faith for bad behavior because they have so many other places to what? To go.
If you want to wake up call, how many churches of Christ in Lincoln County have elders?
How many are closing their doors because they don't have any?
There were 29 at one time. It's down to probably about 22.
Aren't there only 2 in Lincoln County that have elders?
I wouldn't say there. I think there's more than that.
Does Howell Hill has elders now. Oh, yeah, that's right. Howell has elders now. We have elders. West Fayetteville Church of Christ has elders. That's the one I was trying to think of. I couldn't think of Liberty. Do they have elders?
Liberty does.
No, they don't. I didn't think so.
Crossroads doesn't have any. Liberty doesn't have any.
How many have elders in name only? That's a judgmental concept, where the elders are just in name only. They really don't make decisions. And that's a whole other conversation. We're not getting into that.
The one that I've not visited, they call it just the men's meeting.
Yeah, where you have a couple guys that are tagged as elders, but they do everything by proxy of the church. So, which is not. Anyway, it's a whole. Don't get me off topic, right? So we are unable to enforce consequences because they can just go somewhere else. You know why QR codes are effective? No offense. Don't take this the wrong way. Is because those kids can what? Go somewhere else. How many? Okay, I'm going to ask you a hard question. How many kids end up at your school because they've got tossed out of the other schools?
We don't take them when they're tossed. That's homeschool.
You know how many homeschool kids are in the homeschool? That's 100%. That's true. It's true. Oh, there's going to be.
Actually, wind up at this church.
Because that's their only. If they did
See, that was great, wasn't it? Okay.
Ours get kicked out and they can't get in RCA, so they
Tammy.
go into homeschool. That's why they didn't know. I mean,
There's 2 separate kinds of
Actually, they wind up in his classroom.
I think, Jeremy, that was a good point.
He knows because they go through.
I'm out of here before the hen fight starts.
It is very difficult to enforce consequences within a corporate structure if there's somewhere for them to go. Right? But consequences are still necessary. Right? We didn't get anywhere to where I wanted to be today, Tommy. All right. Let me ask you this question. We've got a couple minutes. Are consequences biblical?
Absolutely.
Give me examples. Spare the rod, spoil the child. Ananias and Sapphira. What was the consequence of their behavior? They died. What was their behavior? They lied. Lying to God cost them their life. Absolutely. Great example. Spare the rod, spoil the child. Right? Now that's a discipline concept. That's not necessarily a beat them with a stick concept. But it's, are you disciplining? Those people touched the ark. They were just trying to steady it from falling over. But God said what? Don't touch the ark, and what they do? They
were
died.
carrying it wrong in the first place.
They
That was
carried
the
it wrong.
problem. They disobeyed originally.
What else?
Moses,
Moses. What happened to Moses?
he got denied the promised land after all the work he did because he was supposed to stick to the rock and not.
He took credit for God's miracle. Is why he got. What happened to Aaron, who was with him? Aaron didn't even get to what?
See the promise.
He didn't even get to see the promised land. Moses at least got to see the promised land. David would tell you that he lost a son because of his sin with who? Uriah's consequence was what? For what? Just being married to Bathsheba. Are consequences biblical?
It's in the law of nature too.
Right?
God says thou shalt not.
Thou shalt. Go ahead.
I was just saying nature has its own consequences.
Yes.
You know, you may get bit by a snake, you're gonna die probably.
All right. So
Messing around in snakes.
I mess with my brother. My brother just moved to Florida. What might be a consequence of living in Florida? Sharks. Alligators. How about hurricanes? We live in Tornado Alley. What's the consequence of living here? What have we just seen nature's consequence of where we put houses and businesses? They keep getting hit. All right. New Orleans, they built it in a bathtub and surrounded it with concrete. What happens every now and then? It floods. We keep building it back. Right? Nature has consequences. We don't learn very well, do we? Oh, we just build them bigger. We build them stronger. Oh, we'll beat it this time. Right? Nature, I think that's a great one, actually. Nature has consequences, and we pay those consequences. Other natural things pay those consequences.
Yeah, Al Robertson said that, the Robertson family, after one of the hurricanes came, I think they had back-to-back hurricanes one year here recently, and he said, we are paying the price for living in land that we should not be living in Louisiana. Bottom line. We shouldn't be here.
Well, they live in a delta.
Yeah.
And a delta is a flood
It
zone.
wasn't
I mean,
easy.
that's just all it
wasn't
is.
made for human habitation, and we tried to make it, and this is what we get.
All right, so here's where we're at. Next week, we're going to move on from number 1. It's been 4 weeks or so that we've been in number 1. But have we covered it effectively? Have we overcovered it? Did you say yes? Yeah, it hurts my soul. All right. So we're going to pick up with Aren't Boundaries Selfish next week. All right? Huh? We had a good time with that. All right. Thank you all very much for your comments and your time. Hope you have a great week. Enjoy the beautiful day. Come back and see us next week. We'll pick a new topic.